If we would have told you a month ago, Michigan and Indiana were going to meet in week 3, one team would be 2-0, the other team would be 1-1, both would be in the top 25. I think most people thought, hey, Indiana got off to a pretty good start to the season at 1-1. Anthony Bellino from the Morning Blitz on Fox Sports Radio 1230 here in Toledo, and X's and Bros joins us now. And Anthony, that scenario is playing out, but the roles are reversed. Indiana is the 2-0 team. Michigan is 1-1 after the loss to Michigan State. We'll get into the trophy, Paul Bunyan going back to East Lansing in a moment. But let's start off. Let's do what Jim Harbaugh said they're going to do. Let's turn our focus ahead to what lies ahead in this matchup with Indiana. Tom Allen team with the Hoosiers that I think we've been waiting for this type of game out of Tom Allen's program. They seem like they've been on the cusp for the last couple of years to move up into that number 3 or 4 spot in the Big Ten East, and maybe this is the year they do it.
You know what? Yeah, I mean, it's the Hoosiers, and I think the Hoosiers started off the season surprising everyone with their victory against Penn State at home, welcoming a top 10 Penn State team that went down to the wire in overtime, the reach for the pylon, and then beating a Rutgers team last week by 16 points. The same Rutgers team that handed it to Michigan State. So I think that for those Indiana faithful, this is, like you said, Mark, this is the team that they have been waiting for. But at the same time, I don't think that this is the Indiana Hoosiers team that the Big Ten expected. So I don't really know what to make out of that Penn State game, especially after the way Penn State had played against Ohio State last week. Where are they really? I don't think that score was indicative at all about how Ohio State had really dominated that contest. And then what really is Rutgers? What is a Rutgers? Greg Schiano's team, a really impressive win, forcing a lot of turnovers from Michigan State week 1, kind of shocking everybody there, but then dropping this game at home last week against the Hoosiers. So I don't really know what to make out of those two teams. But when you let it off with one team would be 1-1 and one team would be 2-0, pretty good start for the Hoosiers. I thought that was a very creative way to start this conversation tonight, because I think that that's exactly right. If you looked at it on the surface, I also think that, had Michigan not had that brand name next to it, you would be talking about a top 25 Hoosier team. And if it wasn't Michigan, it would just be another college game on a Saturday against an unranked opponent.
I think it's impossible to understand the psychology of voters in the polls, but one thing that I was taken aback a little bit was Penn State 0-2. They drop out of the top 25. Michigan 1-1. They did stay in the top 25. And, I mean, arguably, Penn State, you lose to Indiana, you lose to Ohio State, number 13 and number 3. And Michigan, they beat a Minnesota team that all of a sudden doesn't look quite as impressive and lost to a Michigan State team we weren't expecting much out of yet. Michigan remains in the top 25, so obviously the Jim Harbaugh brand is at least powerful enough to keep him in the top 25. Then James Franklin brand couldn't do that for Penn State.
Yeah, the Block M for the last, 15 to almost 20 years, the Block M brand has been better than the product out there on the field. I think that much is for certain. So when I always get really, I get a little wiry when it comes down to these polls, because how are the voters actually voting? I saw somebody who still had a Penn State 0-2 inside like the top 25, and it was like, how is that even possible? So I don't really put a whole lot of stock into the rankings until the College Football Playoff Committee meets, but it's a nice baseline, I guess, to have. But I think that also from the Michigan fan base, very excited after week 1, thought that a lot of good things were happening, and then for week 2 to happen the way that it did against Michigan State at home. This could be the longest, shortest season for Michigan fans in the history of college football.
It is going to be an interesting next couple of weeks for the Wolverines. Let's get into that loss to Michigan State. Joe Milton, maybe the most quiet 300-yard passing game in the history of college football. He had 300 yards, but I think the longest was only 26 yards. So he didn't play poorly, but certainly did not play well enough to get Michigan the victory.
Yeah, the stats are very deceiving. You look at the last scoring drive that Michigan had, and Michigan State did a very good job. I thought it was exceptional considering the situational football and the guys all being aware and very present play-by-play, that they basically just created the umbrella. They left the middle of the field wide open. We'll give you anything underneath that you want, but we're not going to let you hit the sidelines. We're not going to let you get over the top of us. And you can start racking up some yardage like that, much like Michigan did. Yeah, take that 7-yarder between the hashes and keep that clock running. We're okay with that. I thought that in comparison to week number 1, I thought that Joe Milton had some happy feet. I didn't see a lot of juice and a lot of energy out of the sideline. I thought that the offense looked a little disheveled at times when they figured that they couldn't run between the tackles, because let's face it, Michigan State's defensive line and offensive line, both of their trenches units did a number on the Wolverines. They dominated that game, did Sparty, and they should be very proud of the effort that they put together. But I thought it was a really good job by Mel Tucker's team there late in that game to identify the situation at hand. And that was the fact that you could not allow Michigan to stop the clock without using a timeout. And they did a fantastic job. Michigan State did defensively. Joe Milton, happy feet most of the game. His throws were off when he took long shots. They weren't even really close. As good as he looked in week 1, I thought he looked equally as bad here in week 2.
Yeah, you hear about the 4-minute drive. Well, Michigan got the ball back down 2 scores with 5:11. That's not when you want the 4-minute drive. That took over almost 5 minutes to get that touchdown by Hassan Haskins. We know that the quarterback position is the most scrutinized position in all of athletics. Do you put much stock into Joe Milton's demeanor after the game? He was saying all the right things. He was saying it was my fault. He was saying I had happy feet. But he seemed a little happy-go-lucky. And then when he was asked about Michigan State linebacker Antoine Simmons, he said, I don't know who that is. And they prompted only number 34. Well, he really wasn't on my radar. And that interaction almost perfectly encapsulates the entire little brother, big brother, Michigan State dynamic of Michigan State taking offense over Joe Milton not recognizing who the other guy was.
Well, I mean, Joe Milton, God bless you, but you got to be better than that. You can get beat, you can give credit where credit is due, and you can respect your opponent. I don't have any problems with any of that. I thought that, for you to come out and say that in the press conference, like, oh, you didn't know who that guy was. Really, that guy was all over the field tackling everything in sight. Antoine Simmons was a playmaker. You talk about a game that you want to put on your resume to potentially play at the next level. That was a game from Antoine Simmons. He was everywhere that they needed him to be. And I thought that, yeah, Joe Milton, you can put that on yourself. That's fine. You take one on the chin for your team. Good for you, and good to learn that lesson early, because as the quarterback, you got to be the driving force for that offense. You have to make the throws, and he made some great throws. There was one in the quadruple coverage where it was just high enough that it didn't get batted, or even worse, intercepted. It was a magnificent throw that resulted into I believe it was a touchdown, if I'm thinking correctly. But it was fantastic. The ball might have been down at the 1-yard line. Regardless, they score on that drive, and it's like, okay, that kind of throw you can make, but could you make 25 yards down the field? And that just didn't happen for Joe Milton. The receivers looked like they might have had some space, but nothing was given if the ball's not on the mark. So a little bit questionable on the long ball accuracy. He tends to lack a little bit of the touch necessary to be able to play that. I mean, he's got a cannon for an arm, but you don't have to throw a fastball. Sometimes you can throw a changeup or a raindrop, if you will. Throw the rainmaker up there and let your receiver run into it. And I thought that the accuracy overall wasn't great. And then to hear those comments afterwards, I think a little disappointing to not recognize the fact that Antoine Simmons played a good game. There's nothing, you really can't take anything away from that young man. And the fact that you said that, oh, he wasn't on our radar, I don't know who that is. Well, apparently you didn't, because you lost. You probably should have highlighted that name and that number and maybe focused on it a little more, and that result might have been a little different.
We've talked about this a few weeks ago. After this loss, it's becoming louder and louder. I'll ask you, is this the final nail in the Jim Harbaugh coffin at Michigan?
Well, Mark, you know me as an employee of the university. When it comes to who's coming and who's going, I don't really have a whole lot to say in that regard. But what I will say is that this loss this past week to Michigan State will really be kind of unforgivable by the Michigan fan base. And I think that what is most maybe disturbing to the Wolverines fans is the fact that, you look back to 2016 when the hire was made and the excitement around the program. This was going to be the launching point. And then, okay, after the first couple of years, it was like, wait till we get our guys in here. Wait till we get our quarterback. We waiting and waiting and waiting. And in today's microwavable society, when we wanted everything we wanted 5 minutes ago, it's very difficult to show the patience that's needed to be successful, especially when you look at their biggest rival, who is Ohio State. They had one down year with Luke Fickell. That was it. They hired Urban Meyer. Urban Meyer passed the torch to who? Ryan Day. That program hasn't missed a beat, whereas Michigan has been struggling to find that quote-unquote savior as Jim Harbaugh was anointed, and it just hasn't worked out yet. I mean, they've been a good team. They've been a top 25 program, but they haven't been to the level that Michigan fans thought that they were going to get when that hire was made. And I think that, there are some theories out there about the fact that, hey, maybe this is why there isn't a contract in place for him moving forward past this year. Maybe they look and, maybe it's a mutual parting of ways or whatever the case may be. I don't know if I can call for the man's job as far as, being the head coach. I think you look at the defensive side of the football and you can definitely throw out some question marks on that side. Well, how come the same adjustments that weren't made from the first half to the second half in Ohio State's game last year Why weren't those same adjustments made at all during the Michigan State game this past weekend? That is because Don Brown wants to play aggressive, which is fine if you can get to the quarterback. Rocky Lombardi was getting the football out so fast. The offensive line was doing such a good job that they really nullified any sort of pass rush that Michigan was able to really use effectively against Minnesota. Michigan State broke that immediately. So how are you going to adjust to stop what was taking place, which was, hey, we got man on the outside. We're going to throw the ball deep, and then either you're going to get called for a penalty or our guy's going to catch it. Those are the only two options you guys really have back there. And I think that the lack of adjustment there from Don Brown, it's pretty glaring once again.
And I think one of the interesting things that came out on Monday following that secondary's performance against Michigan State is that the Michigan safeties coach, Mike Shoup, has not been working with the team for a while now. He has been working remotely. The university is expressing that they want to keep confidentiality. They're not going into details about why Shoup isn't working with the team directly, but he's not working directly. Basically, a quality control guy is taking over that safeties coach role, and maybe that's part of the reason why they've had such issues. I mean, I know the cornerbacks are getting picked on more than the safeties against Michigan State, but when that comes out after that performance, that raises some more eyebrows.
It will raise some eyebrows, and I think that everybody wants to know in what relation it is to. So we respect the privacy, but the first thing that comes to your mind is it a COVID issue? Is that why you're working remotely? I mean, we have no idea. It's just pure speculation until we get some sort of confirmation one way or the other. But I definitely think losing someone like that out of your locker room or off of your sideline will affect you. But at the end of the day, the defensive coordinator is calling the defense. And if you have man on the outside with no safety help over the top, and you know that you have a guy that's Slick Rick running wild down the sidelines that no one can stop unless you're holding him. And I thought that Joel Klatt touched on that in the broadcast. This is what Michigan is known for. They're going to hold you. Well, that's illegal. That's a penalty, and they're going to call it 9 times out of 10. They were calling it all game. So there has to be a teaching moment here for this defense and how not to get called and basically keep your hands off. You can cover without putting your hands on somebody after that 5-yard grace period you get where you're allowed to put your hands on somebody and jam them at the line of scrimmage. So there is work to be done in that back end, whether you're doing it remotely or you are in somebody's jock strap the very next day. They have some serious issues on the back end when there's no pass rush. It's got to be complementary football. Your front 4 and your front 7 have to be able to put pressure on the quarterback to force early throws. Your back 4 or your back 7, including your linebackers, have to be able to cover in space. If you want to play man all day, that's great, but you have to have the corners in order to do so. And I think the reluctancy to switch over to any sort of zone it's really hurting Michigan overall.
Wolverines talked continually about how this is going to be a bounce-back week. They have to bounce back to take on Indiana. And if you want to look at Jim Harbaugh's performance, there's only been once in the regular season where Michigan State has lost back-to-back games back at the end of the 2017 season, losing to Wisconsin and Ohio State back-to-back weeks. So can they bounce back and get back to 2-1 with a win in Bloomington this Saturday?
Can they? Yes. Will they is a completely different story. I mean, this is going to tell you a lot about the resolve of the young men that are in that locker room. Are they going to, look at what Michigan State did. Okay, you went out and laid an egg against Rutgers, and somehow you pulled all the juice necessary to get geared up, ready to go for your rivalry game. And I thought that was incredible from a Michigan State perspective for those guys to be able to rally their troops after a disappointing, dismal week number 1 loss of Rutgers and come out and really punch Michigan in the mouth. So how does Michigan respond? That's going to be the biggest question. They did it last year after getting thumped by Wisconsin. They came back out the next couple of weeks and kind of string some things together. But what makes it interesting in college football is that when your goal is as lofty, now whether it's a realistic expectation or not, if you want to play for a college football playoff berth, you have to be perfect. And the fact that perfect season has already been blown up before you even got a sniff at Ohio State, that's going to be very difficult, I think, for these guys to try to wrap their heads around the fact that ultimate goal is now gone. So what are you playing for next? Now it's just a pride thing. And I think that this is really going to tell you a lot about the young guys in that locker room, those college kids. How much resolve do they have? Things aren't going your way. Again, how do you respond to it?
Bo Schembechler famously said, the team, the team, the team. We've heard about the cohesiveness of this team all offseason. It's going to be tested. We should get a better answer this week. And I want to thank Anthony Bellino from Morning Sports Blitz on Fox Sports Radio, 1230 here in Toledo on the X's and Bros for joining us, as always, on College Football Weekly. Anthony, thank you.
Thank you, Mark.